So now let's take a look at damping. So remember at the beginning of the course when we talked about how sounds bounce around a room to create echoes and reflections which make up a reverb. And as those echoes bounce around a room, they are both absorbed by surfaces and objects and also reflected by surfaces and objects. While damping is like the absorption happening as the sound is bouncing around a room. But with damping in Valhalla Vintage Verb, we can also extend the decay time of the low end frequencies. So with damping in Valhalla Vintage Verb, we're able to decrease the reverb time of the top end frequencies, and then the low end frequencies, we can either shorten them or lengthen them. So remember when we talked about how a concert hall is a large room, the top end frequencies tend to decay much quicker, the mid frequencies sit around the middle, and then the low end frequencies are usually take a little bit longer to decay. They build up more in the room and start to have more energy and decay time. So we can mimic those types of settings using damping in digital reverbs. So let's take a look at Valhalla Vintage Verb. You can see on the top here, we've got this damping section, and then we've got high frequency, we've got bass frequency, and then we've got high shelf, and then we've got this bass multiplier. So I'm going to start with the high end, and then we'll get on to the bass section in a second. So it's also worth recapping on decay as well, because decay will kind of in a way comes into this. So remember when we looked at decay and I mentioned that Valhalla Vintage Verb says at the bottom there that it sets the reverb decay time for the mid frequencies. Well, at the moment it's affecting all frequencies, but then when we start to employ damping, then the decay time is mostly affecting the mid frequencies, and damping is affecting the high and low decay times. So I've got this drum loop here set up with Atlas. Let's just open this up. And I've got a bunch of different percussive sounds taken from Gradient and Fluid, and I made a little pattern that sounds like this with no reverb on. So I've shortened some of those sounds so that they've got no reverb apparent, because some of these sounds have reverbs applied to them in the sample pack. So I've made them as dry as possible. Now I'm going to switch on the reverb and actually push the mix all the way up to 100%. So we can only hear the reverb, and then I'm going to start to bring down the damping so you can hear exactly what's happening. So I've got quite a long decay time, 1.27 seconds. And then what I'm going to do is bring the high shelf all the way down. So this is at its most extreme setting. So imagine that this is the severity of the decay time being shortened. I'm going to bring it all the way down, and then we're going to start to bring the high frequency down. At the moment, it's not going to add any damping until I start to bring the frequency down. So any frequencies above this point, wherever I set it, will start to be affected by the damping. So check this out. So you'll notice that we can still actually hear the hi-hat. It's not like the EQ where we totally shave off the top end like this. What we're actually doing is just shortening the decay times of those top frequencies. Now if we bring the decay all the way up and leave it at this point, you'll notice the frequencies around this area and below decay a lot longer than the high frequencies. The high frequencies are short and snappy. So let's set the top end damping for this drum loop, and let's just set this up. So I want quite a short decay time. Let's go for a little bit higher, around 0.7 seconds. I'll bring the mix up quite a bit so you can hear it. And I'm going to bring the high shelf all the way up and the high frequency. And I'll bring the high shelf down, and then we'll set a point for the high frequency. So I can use this to get rid of some of that top fizzy end coming from the hi-hats and shorten the decay of those hi-hats so they're not ringing out as much. And then I can start to bring this high shelf up a little bit just to back it off. So it just dampens it a little bit and sounds quite nice and vibey. So now we're going to look at the bottom section. So what I'm going to do now is bring the mix all the way back up, reset the top end damping, and bring the decay up to around 2 seconds so we can hear this working.
Now, if I bring, actually this doesn't matter at the moment because I've got this set to 1. So the bass multiplier, what this does is if you have this set to 1, it means it's timesing it by 1, so nothing's changing. But if we push this up to times 4, it's going to be 4 times the length of the decay time. And if you bring it all the way down, so 0.25, it's going to be a quarter of the time of this decay time. So if we push it up, it's going to be 8 seconds, I think. And then if we bring it down, it's going to be half a second. So it's going to be half a second if we bring it down. So let's test this out. So this bass frequency here, any frequencies below this point will be affected by this bass multiplier. So in this instance, these frequencies are going to be shortened. If I bring it up, they're going to be lengthened by times 4. So I'm going to bring this all the way up to 10,000 hertz, and it means that we can manipulate quite a wide band of frequencies, so you can hear this really working. So at the moment it's set to 2 seconds, and then I'm going to bring it all the way down and take it all the way to the top. So this is extremely handy because if we were setting up a concert hall preset, concert halls usually have around 1.3 times to 1.5 times the amount of decay time that happens on the mids. So we can replicate a concert hall by adding a bit of damping to the top end and increasing the decay length of the low end to get that big concert hall sound. In mixing terms, we can use this to our advantage in a lot of ways, because if we have a full spectrum sound, so all frequencies are going off, and we want the low end frequencies to be shortened, then we could set this to a point, say 400 hertz. So everything below 400, we can shorten those frequencies. So it just gives us a way in which we can shorten those low end frequencies so they're not getting muddy. But in classic terms, the way that you would use this is to lengthen the low end decays, so you can set up spaces like concert halls and cathedrals. So that was damping. Let's now move over to shape, which has size and attack.